We are delighted to be collaborating with AFUSA, the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. Here's a short video. We'll put links to more information about both AFUSA and Telescope Film in the chat in just a moment here. French Cinémathèque ordinarily takes place the fourth Monday of every month, but next month, the fourth Monday is Memorial Day. So instead, we're going to meet on the third Monday, which is May 19th. We'll be talking about the film Full Time, directed by Eric Gravel and starring Laure Calamy. But our film for today is The French Dispatch, directed by Wes Anderson. Before we get started, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking and stay on speaker view. To ask a question, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your screen in the reaction section, or put your question in the chat. If there are technical issues, I hope we're done with our technical issues for today, you may want to leave the Zoom, then sign back in after a couple of minutes using the Zoom link that got you here. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channels, and the total runtime is 1 hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce our facilitator for today, who is also the Chief Film Critic for Variety, Peter Debruge. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Justine. Thank you all for kind of following us along here. Today is a little different from usual, as you can imagine, because the film was 90+% in English. But of course, it is such a celebration of French culture that we thought it would be an appropriate title for us to kind of take a look at here and unpack. I think there might be someone who's still unmuted. We'll come back to your comments in a minute. I think Wes Anderson probably needs less introduction maybe than some of the filmmakers that we look at, but I want to give some context to people who might be kind of stumbling upon this movie without having seen the director's other work. Wes Anderson is, maybe I can share this anecdote. When I used to teach film school, it's been maybe 10 years ago, but like I was a little bit surprised to discover that the filmmaker that this generation seems to be most enamored with is Wes Anderson. And, for me, who's a few years older, I remember, kind of being blown away by Quentin Tarantino or Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, these guys, right? But for this generation, I think it extends to today. Wes Anderson is that guy. And, in talking to the students and in just considering that perspective, it kind of makes obvious sense to me now. Like, here is a director whose fingerprints are on every frame of every film he makes, whose style is a signature. You know you're watching a Wes Anderson movie. Now we even know when people are basically imitating Wes Anderson, whether it's in a music video, a commercial, or in a film. But he's really someone who has carved out his own voice. And in doing that, I think he was able to arrive at the film that we're talking about today. It's his next to last, or technically two away, since he'll have a film that premieres in Cannes in 2 weeks. That one's called The Phoenician Scheme, and I couldn't even begin to guess what it's going to be about. The trailer is as dense as this movie is, and is full of like little tasty teasers. But what I think we've kind of learned about Wes Anderson along the road, here's a guy who grew up in Dallas, Texas, in kind of an all-American situation, and who has reinvented himself by moving to Paris. He did that a number of years ago, and this is kind of his new home. And I believe that this movie is not just a love letter to his new home, but also obviously to kind of mid-century American journalism, a la The New Yorker. It's quite clearly kind of inspired by The New Yorker and other magazines of its ilk. But so this movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, pretty sure 2 years ago, and the it did not get the kind of laughs that I thought it would from the French audience. But I can assure you that when I've seen this movie so many times now, when I saw it, with American crowds, it kills, right? Or at least it's got steady chuckles the whole way through, right? So I'm very curious with that kind of rollout, just to sort of take a temperature gauge on not the film, although that's part of the question, but on the director, because everybody seems to have kind of a different reaction to Wes Anderson's kind of aesthetic. So I invite strong reactions. That is, people who found that they flipped for it, or people who might have had an allergic reaction who want to start us off, and we'll kind of go from there. So, who wants to start? I know you're dedicated because you followed us across the Zoom Twilight Zone here. Uh, is anyone okay, Suzette has put a note in chat. Would you like to unmute and share with us kind of your feelings? Go ahead, Suzette.
Hi, can you see me?
We can, thanks.
Oh, okay. I changed my who I see here. I'm a Francophone, as my friends call me, because
I
I
love
love
that.
everything French. And so this film really resonated with me. I want to move to Ennui sur,
Blase.
Blase. Yeah, that's my favorite town now. I don't know, it's like the quality of the cinematography, the production values. I mean, just that one scene where you look at all those different kinds of radios, everybody's tinkering with all their radio. Like, where does he find all of his stuff? I mean, the films are so thick and rich with production value. And then, of course, he uses just, A-listers to play all these parts. And so it's kind of a joke to us because we know what Bill Murray's all about. We've seen him in other things. And here we get to see him in another situation. And it's just as much fun for us. I think he put lots of Easter eggs in his films that are just so much fun to watch. And I was wondering, is anybody in Paris right now?
You mean among our
participants, because the Cinémathèque Française has a Wes Anderson exhibit, and I've been trying all kinds of ways to figure out how to get to Paris before July.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They've got all of the production stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be exciting for people who can. I'm going to Cannes in a week. That's why I won't be with you for the May episode, but I can guarantee you I'm going to be stopping by the Cinémathèque Française.
Oh, tell us about it.
Yeah, next time I'm here, I can share. But just before moving on to the next person, Suzette, had you seen other Wes Anderson movies before?
Everything. I follow everything he does. Everything.
Great.
Asteroid City was just amazing. Isle of Dogs. I love that one too.
So his work pretty well. Is there?
Oh yeah, I have most of them in DVD here.
Sure. Well, great. We'll come back to discuss the film a little bit more, but I'm just kind of curious here as we sort of feel people out. I haven't always loved Wes Anderson. There's not a right answer. Let's see. I see Alan raising his hand. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, the film it's visually stunning.
I see you're calling us from Ennui sur Blase. Thank you. I love your background.
That's right. Yeah. I'm right there in the visual. Every scene, is just almost surreal the way it's put together, and particularly the tableaus of views of Paris we all love those, and particularly the old ones, or some in black and white or the washed out color. But I had the feeling that in feeding us those tableaus, he's also somewhat skewering people like us, the audience, because, how many times have we gone to see a French film from the 1950s or the 1960s, and you come out saying, "Oh, wasn't it wonderful to see those views of Paris in the 1950s, the 1960s?" And he's giving us those, but it's kind of a little bit kind of skewering us thinking with such great nostalgia about what that all used to look like, and he's doing a lot of skewering of other things too, like um, the 1960s radicals in the little vignette about uh, the students with the
The
manifesto.
Farrelly character, the
Yeah.
Timothy
Yeah.
Chalamet student, right?
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean to end your comment. I was just supplying the name, but
No,
I'm
no, but I mean,
interested in your use of the word skewering, though. He's definitely maybe poking fun, but it doesn't seem so vicious,
no, it's not vicious. It's good naturedly, but American cinephiles who love to see this kind of stuff up on the screen. It's kind of in a very exaggerated way, and kind of reminding us of how we react to this when presented with these kind of tableaus.
Right, right. And he's also obviously bringing a lot of things together, not just French things, but references from the period and all sorts of stuff. It can sometimes be quite daunting, and I think one of the things that is great about getting to watch it in this context, which is to say, you watch it at home on your own, and then we come back, is you can always go back or pause or kind of like examine things where when you're in the theater seeing this, it is almost overwhelming. That becomes part of the experience, potentially part of the pleasure, but but it can also be a lot to sort of be trying to grab onto at any given time, and everybody probably reacts to different things. Any other first reactions? We can kind of unpack it a little bit more in a bit, but I'm just kind of curious. Did anyone find it overwhelming? Or I remember having to defend this movie quite a bit when it came out, and maybe those people chose not to join us today. I don't know. All right. Well, you can always bring up that point of view later, but so in a way, I think it's interesting that Wes Anderson lives in France and comes with this American sensibility. I think that's what we're seeing in the movie in a way, is kind of whether it's skewering or bemusement or like I feel like there are certain French isms that when you live amongst the French you pick up on, and it might seem absurd, it might seem amusing to you, but those are kind of woven in, I think, to this film, and it could be anything, from someone's accent to the way a certain word sounds to things that are some things are cliches, other things are quite original. Like I think the shot where we see the prostitutes and the gigolos, for instance, kind of in that first sequence with Owen Wilson bicycling around town. They're all dressed like they're out of a 1940s black and white French movie or something, and like that woman who kind of turns to the camera. It's not Simone Signoret, but it could be Madame Rosa from the Oscar-winning French film almost. These are probably not the women you would ever have found in Rue Saint-Denis in Paris, but it's kind of the mythical version of that. And the but there's some very kind of international or American things, like the middle sequence with the art critic, and the kind of I guess, crossover into modern art out of a prison. You know, this is a great line. The kind of describing it as the Paris of the imagination or imaginarium is a good way of putting it. You know, it's kind of a concentrated dose of all sorts of things. And I don't think it's uniquely Paris. I don't know how many of our participants are from, you know, have lived abroad, but it seems to me like a kind of mix of more rural, like Angoulême, I think is probably, I know they shot some things there, and I think it's a major influence to this kind of smaller scale Parisian city that we're seeing, with obviously Paris, the cafes of Paris, like we're getting in the student uprising sequence. But I'm monologuing a bit here. I'd love to kind of hear some other reactions so we can kind of play off of what people picked up on or responded to in the film. I don't want to leave us hanging though either. So uh, are there New Yorker subscribers among us? You know, because this is definitely also an homage to classic New Yorker. Many of its writers are represented in the film. Sometimes they're combined. You know, like sometimes uh, we have uh, the character played by Jeffrey Wright. His character's name is Roebuck Wright, right? And he's quite clearly James Baldwin, who's an American thinker, writer who became an expat, moved to Paris. It's clear from certain clues that he's a black man who's gay, who, has certain political points of view, but he's also, kind of crossed with certain New Yorker writers. Like he's a food critic, which is like A.J. Liebling, was doing for the New Yorker in his heyday, and of course that sequence becomes a big kidnapping situation, which you wouldn't encounter in the New Yorker at all. But the if I see Suzette saying in the credit or in our chat, she's been reading the New Yorker for years, and of course, a lot of those names appear in the credits as kind of references. Somewhere around my apartment here, I have the book where Wes Anderson, it's called An Editor's Burial, and it's a collection of a number of the stories and pieces that inspired the film. Like, for instance, you have Mavis Gallant, who was a Canadian writer who moved to Paris, where she lived for most of her life, and her what was that? The Events in May article, which is, I don't know how many thousands of words long, but it's basically a kind of like diary chronicle of the 1968 student, protests in Paris. That is obviously the template for the sequence where we have Frances McDormand playing a version of her. Alan, you picked up on that sequence, and I'm very curious how other people read it. But that of course is a turning point in French history, and through the lens of Wes Anderson, who's often been kind of a whimsical director, we have it represented. So he's acknowledging kind of a political moment and honoring it at the same time as you could say he's probably skewering in that case, right? I mean, he basically has the students portrayed as these kind of immature children, and their kind of mother figure has to come in and edit their manifesto, right? The How did anyone else take that sequence? Or does anyone have a favorite part of the movie? Because that's often how people react to it. It's like, I love that part, but maybe I could have done without this one. I definitely want to encourage this to be a conversation. I'm happy to give lecture
I
on.
I find the movie difficult to talk about because well,
Sure.
first of all, it has different sections. So and to tell you the truth, I have seen it before, and somehow it was kind of difficult for me to watch it. I wouldn't say that I didn't like it, but you know, it's not my thing. I guess I prefer Tarantino. Must be my
Yeah.
age, I don't know.
No, I think that's a point of view that a lot of people share, and those who find Wes Anderson to whatever it is that they don't like about him. And you know, there are times in which I've not loved his things, find this movie in many ways to be the most Wes Anderson movie. Does that make sense? Because everything that he kind of had been doing up to this point, we get here in a concentrated form. Like a good example might be he's kind of developed a company of actors. So little by little, he's been working with Bill Murray, who is there in Rushmore, his second film, and he, you know, adds in other actors as he goes along. And here we have this kind of reunion of almost everyone practically. You know, there are certain people like, you know, Gene Hackman, who recently passed away, was in just one Wes Anderson movie, The Royal Tenenbaums, but there are others, you know, who kind of seem to be in all of them. Bob Balaban, you know, like pops up here or there, and and so by the time you have a company of what seems to be 24 actors, you're dealing with a lot of characters to keep up with, a lot of, you know, things for the audience to juggle. You know, that can be too much for some people, you know. And this is obviously not your traditional movie where there's some one character to follow from the beginning to the end. You have kind of the framing device of Bill Murray as the editor, but
I like
go ahead.
the Royal Tenenbaum better.
Yeah.
Yes.
That feels like the first one where we're kind of getting some of the things that he's now kind of, you know, squared and maybe even cubed, if you follow my kind of math equation here, in terms of his signature, right? You know, because there you already had a world that was very constructed, every set, everything, you know, every detail, you know, every coffee cup means something, every frame on the wall, you know, has a significance, and you could get lost in those worlds exploring them, which of course for the Paris of the imagination idea that was floated here, you know, is something that can be kind of enticing, but it can also be maybe too much for some people. Diane, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
I do, and I can't
Please.
find where the hand raise is.
Fine, I noticed you, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that since Wes Anderson is in France and 1968 was a huge year for the French, and especially I would imagine the age group of Wes Anderson, they still talk about that today because that was a big change in their society with the student uprising or test or whatever you want to call it. And I thought it was very interesting that Wes Anderson, you know, looked at that and the way that he, yeah, just the way that he looked at it. And then, yes, had somebody come in and it's like, okay, well, let me fix your manifesto because, you know, as students, yeah, evidently didn't learn English or French, right? You didn't learn the grammar, basically. And, you know, writing something comprehensive, you know, for your movement. So
Right. That's a good example of a sequence where there's a lot of stuff going on. There's obviously the centerpiece seems to be the, you know, student protests of May 1968, and it seems to be presented through the lens of Mavis Gallant or a character equivalent to her, with this invention of her sleeping with, you know, the subject of her article, which is, I guess, a Wes Anderson joke. But you have other things like, you know, she adds in this kind of tragic element, which gives there's something very comical about the way it's portrayed, but then, when we learn that Zeffirelli dies young, suddenly there's, an emotional dimension. And then you have the little shrine, to Zeffirelli, which is, of course, something that exists very much in France or in Paris around certain celebrity deaths. The house of Serge Gainsbourg has become, in Rue Verneuil, it's become a shrine. You can go to Rue Daguerre and visit the house, where Agnès Varda and Jacques Demy lived. You can go to, in Père Lachaise cemetery, you can visit and smooch the, tombstones of your favorite French, celebrities and such. So like, that's obviously something where he's just pulling elements of things that he seems to love or maybe feel amused by about French culture into this one portrait, Um, did that's also a sequence where we start to see maybe a few other French actors appear. They come in later too, but did you guys recognize like the parents of Timothée Chalamet are two pretty well-known French stars. His mother is Cécile de France, technically Belgian, even though her name wouldn't suggest it. And Guillaume Gallienne, whose movies haven't really crossed over as much, but he's a big, comic star over there. And here I see like Wes Anderson using the opportunity. If I'm going to make a movie in France, I'm going to populate it with, actors I love. You get Mathieu Amalric in the next sequence, for instance. So it's like this movie is, whoever described it as Easter eggs, that's one way to think of it, but it's just like so full of details. I was trying to make a screenshot. There's a detail that tickles me when I'm watching that last sequence, and it tells me that I'm missing 1,000 other things. And that detail is like in the kidnapper's apartment, you have a guy in a cowboy hat with sunglasses on indoors. And that is, to me, so obviously an homage to the filmmaker Jean-Pierre Melville, whose kind of signature, he kind of reinvented himself as this Stetson hat wearing, kind of American style director in France. And if I picked up on that, I don't even know how many other things I'm missing, but that can be a pleasure. Or maybe, Sylvia, when you're talking about it not being so much for you, not to pick on you, but that may be one of the things where it's like, oh, there's just too much of that kind of stuff, throughout the thing eventually. But let's just ask the question, does anyone have a favorite sequence, like a chapter, or even we can take it into a micro bit, like a favorite little detail, and you can tell us why that appealed to you. Go ahead, Renee.
I can't figure out how to raise my hand, and I just was in the car. But no, one of the things that I just loved, and one of my worst memories of Paris was being trapped when the Gilets jaunes were there, and I couldn't get back to my hotel. I couldn't move, and they said, "Don't worry, madame, it's l'heure d'apéro." So that the whole scene with the food, that everything stops for a meal. I mean, it's true. I lived it in Paris. I literally could not get back to my hotel. I couldn't go anywhere until I was told that it was going to be l'heure d'apéro and not to worry. And 5 minutes later, there wasn't a person on the street. But that's so true. I mean, it's a wonderful sequence. And especially to see what they're eating. They've stopped in the middle of everything to eat, but it's the picture, the drama. I mean, I love that. And that is so true to anybody who knows the essence
Right.
of a meal in France.
Well, and it talks about kind of like how civilized the French can be, but in a way that obviously brings out the absurdity of it.
Absurd.
They taunt, for the apéro.
Well, especially with Mathieu Amalric, I mean, who literally made the whole thing just hysterical. But
yeah, there's probably not a Frencher French actor than Mathieu Amalric, certainly of that generation. To me, he looks like Serge Gainsbourg. There's something in his, physiognomy.
Yeah.
Suzette, it looks like you're unmuted, so maybe you wanted to add something.
Just the food part was my favorite too. Anything culinary French is fabulous. But the fact that the child sent a message that he needed a snack. Like that was so French to me, and that everything would stop to make sure the child got the snack, and they come in and it was, for the rescue, but that's not what the child wanted. He wanted a snack, he wanted.
Well, it's interesting in that sequence too. Like, there's a lot more violence in that sequence than I can recall in any other Wes Anderson movie. Now, he sometimes plays with things like that, or a chase scene or something like that, but it speaks to kind of his style now that it's become. It's almost part of the joke, right? Like, when the guy sitting across from the kid is, bleeding from the temple and collapsed on the table. It's not disgusting or horrifying in the way that it would be in so many contemporary directors' execution of that, and directors I love, but who kind of move in a totally different direction. And then it becomes true of the sincere things too, right? You never know if something is going to make you laugh or kind of catch you off guard emotionally. I can think of a couple moments in here when I wasn't expecting to kind of feel something emotional where that happened. Did that occur for anyone else at a place in the movie where you thought you were watching a comedy and suddenly you were like, oh, that snuck up on me and he kind of got me with that? So, for instance, I would say that's true of Léa Seydoux, another of the great French actors, kind of the moment, who plays the model, who turns out to be the guard. We don't know that when we first see her. And those are all jokes or like they make us laugh when, we see her stretching, we see her, kind of bat away Benicio del Toro as he starts to paint her instead of painting her, and then when she puts on her uniform. But by the end of that sequence, by the time that she's walking in front of those frescoes and looking at what is her, a rendition of her, but also looks like, my child could paint that kind of thing, right? I found myself really moved by that sequence. And I think that's something that Anderson, does in a very special way, So that's my example of that. I don't know if anyone had that elsewhere in the film where a comedy kind of snuck up on you here, but well, we don't have to.
I don't know, bringing in the cake, he's dead. The boss is dead, and they bring in the cake, and then people go, "Oh, I'll take a slice. I'll take a slice." Like,
right.
they don't really have a visceral reaction to his passing in any way, but they were all very close with him, I'm sure, as employees and
yeah, the poisoning of the chef is a good example. Potentially the death of Zeffirelli is an example. I mean, these are things where whether they work for you or not, it's like suddenly there's that dimension to the film. One thing I find really interesting about French humor or kind of literary culture is the way that they deal with irony, which I think is very different from Americans. And they have this kind of premier degré, deuxième degré, troisième degré, they kind of describe it like that. And it's almost like if you take something at surface value, it's premier degré. And then you can kind of like turn that and, either laugh at it or subvert it, and then do that, kind of a third time, or I guess potentially an infinite number of times. And the kids these days, they're into this kind of like, post-modern, post-irony, whatever, like, stuff where, you troll people. And then when they fall for it, that's the joke, right? But I think that Wes Anderson has kind of like figured out the French idea of irony in a way that you can have it multiple ways. You know, you can have the emotional core of something, and you can also have the joke, and you can be in a mode of homage while you're also skewering, right? You know, like that's going on at the same time. Who was reminded of a famous French filmmaker in the kind of opening when we have the, you know, the 5-story building and the waiter kind of going up all the flights of stairs? I feel like this movie's full of these kind of, you know, winks, these clin d'oeil at other people, but that's one that's probably familiar, I'm guessing, to a bunch of you. Should I give the answer? Does someone recognize? Uh, so to me, this is the Jacques Tati moment in the film,
Okay.
right? You have Mon
Yeah.
Oncle with the kind
Yeah.
of exterior, and clearly that's something we've been getting in so many of Wes Anderson's movies, but here he can really do Tati proud, right? With a sequence that is designed like Tati himself might have orchestrated it, you know, and there's editing going on because that guy, he disappears from one staircase and then he's popped over to the other, you know, one there, but it's all kind of like one shot, right? And you know, to the extent that some people who maybe don't love Wes Anderson criticize him of kind of like making these dollhouse movies, there we get to see like a dollhouse kind of be
The cutaway.
entertaining, like almost literally the cross section of something. You have you know, versions of that in the airplane, of course, you know, with the you know, which is reconstructed on a soundstage and obviously not pretending to be an airplane, but like he had in his submarine movie, or not submarine, but in the Life Aquatic film.
But the town in France was a real town he went to, right? And filmed in
So
it.
I believe that there is no Ennui-sur-Blaise.
No. It's
Right? But like I do think that Angoulême is the model for a lot of the things we see in the film. But most of what you see is kind of done through movie magic. And while I haven't myself seen kind of so much the behind the scenes, I'm guessing there's a lot of like foreshortening where you like things might look really deep, but your production designers, you know, do it through tricks of the eyes like you would on a theater stage or something. Suzette, did you, as someone who follows the New Yorker, did you kind of recognize or any of the kind of homages there? I mean, this isn't meant to be like homework, but rather, you know, it feels like he's
well, that the framework of the movie is each of the writers reporting on their story. And that's what we're seeing. And it's in black and white because that's what print is. And so they're recounting their story to him, why they want them to be included in it. But the end, then they flash all of those New Yorker-esque covers, which is so super duper famous. And I watched the movie again this afternoon on my iPad just so I could stop everything. You know, I could be more like closer to the action of it.
Yeah.
I looked at those covers because in the theater on, you know, TV, I don't stop things so much, but I watched the movie much more critically this afternoon, and I thought, oh yeah, when I watched it the first time, I thought this seems so New Yorker-ish, and then I kind of watched it again today, and I said, oh yeah, he's even bringing out the New Yorker covers, you know, at the end.
Or obviously one of the things that is a real signature of the New Yorker is that they have cartoons and kind of are, you know, comics, very rudimentary ones, single frame. So like, you know, not only do you have the joke early on of Jason Schwartzman, another actor who's been in many Wes Anderson movies and is barely in this one. You have him as the cartoonist doing the turkey with his hands, and then, you know, kind of Bill Murray losing his temper.
Of Bill Murray, of the editor character, just very very small line drawing of him, and it was perfect. I mean, it just captured perfectly.
Or one of my favorite details in the movie is just scribbled on the walls, the yellow walls of the French dispatch office are these kind of drawings. And it's like, if you want to spend time kind of like really scrutinizing the details, and it just shows that they put that much care into it. Because there are sometimes, I guess there's something a little Wes Anderson about the framing of, you know, my Zoom here, where everything is kind of, you know, seems to be orderly, but you know, it's fun when something, instead of just being really symmetrical or lined up, is a little off kilter or is done by hand. You know, the subtitles themselves are not your typical subtitles, right? They almost look like they were like carved into the film or something.
Weird font, yeah.
Right, in this movie. Let's see. Would you guys like to continue another 15 minutes? Because we started a little bit late. I don't know kind of how we're doing, but I'm happy to keep the conversation going. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say a detail that I got a kick out of in the scene in the prison with the artwork. The prisoners had, or at least some of them had written right on their backs what their crime was. Like there was one guy going around saying, and on his back it said "évadé fiscal," and another one "condamné psychopathe." So like you're in prison, and on your prison uniform, you walk around saying, I'm a tax evader or I'm a psychopath or something. And I wasn't sure what that was a reference to, if anything, or whether it was just kind of to be humorous. But I got a kick out of it.
It's a good question. I don't know that that's something that is done. It's almost like scarlet letters, right? Where your crime is, worn. What I read it as is, and I think this is something that can be like the deal breaker for some people on this movie. Everyone in this session is a Francophile, appreciates French culture, is here because you like French movies, and like, and so when you see, things that are kind of jeu de mots or like little plays on words or things like that in the film, you probably have some delight from that, and so either, I think if you have no experience with French, this movie can be daunting, right? Not just because characters are speaking French, because there are subtitles, but there are jokes that are made either in French or in kind of like quasi-French or ersatz French. And that's the way that I read those, which is, I think they're designed to be, for the amusement of people to see kind of like, it's almost like a little puzzle in your head, right? If you don't know French, can you get to like what the sentence is or what the crime is, and it's like, tax evasion. That's, I don't, even though I speak French, I don't think I know what that, is. So you're kind of like, your brain is distracted by that, and you're kind of, playing the trick of, and even the way that, like, I think the second E is like lowercase with the accent aigu, all these details seem to just be part of the kind of, they're there for you if you want to have your brain working on three levels at the same time. Because at the same time you're looking at the back of those prisoners, there's more information going on in the scene, dramatically or
Or the
humorously.
cafe, the Sans Blog Cafe. Oh my God.
The sans blague, and that's a good example, because like in French, sans blague, you may know, just means like no kidding, or like, no joke, right? You'd never put a le in front of it, but and Wes Anderson knows that he can speak French, but a little bit like naming the town, ennui sur blasé. These are two words that of French that Americans might know. Not everyone does. Like, I know that when Pixar did the Inside Out sequel, Inside Out 2, they made a character voiced by Léa Seydoux, I believe, named Ennui, and there was a real debate internally over whether that would work. You know, do you call her boredom? But ennui is really what she represents in that movie. It's a very specific word that doesn't have a corollary in English, and it's the reason why we use it, you know. Uh, so that was me again talking too much about your point, Alan, but uh, like I love that you kind of zeroed in on a detail like that because this movie is so full of details.
I think that's what he does. He overwhelms you with visual, just so much visual stuff. And then the acting part, and then the storyline. I mean, you really don't get as much out of it just seeing it once at all. But that's kind of what I like about it. It's just super saturated with so much
Right, right. And I
stimulation.
think, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just and it is overwhelming to watch. And maybe the first times you've ever seen his films, they're all kind of like that. So, but that's what I like. So
Yeah, I mean, in general, I find that in American movies, and obviously he comes from that culture and that tradition, but in American movies, almost more than any other country in the world, but also just, let's say, commercial cinema around the world, plot becomes kind of the locomotive or the clothesline, you know, depending on how you look at it, the locomotive that, you know, kind of propels the film forward. And so the reason we're invested is this kind of this basic formula, like, you know, you could ask of every American movie, who is your hero? What does he or she want? And what's stopping them? You know, and it's like there's this kind of ticking clock, and it's kind of the Alfred Hitchcock mode. This movie has nothing to do with that. Maybe in micro versions in the kidnapping business, there's a kind of version of that. But and I think when you go to the Cannes Film Festival and when you watch French art films, you may find frequently it just plays differently. It doesn't always have that same kind of thing that's grabbing you by the collar and kind of like running alongside Tom Cruise towards saving the world or whatever, right? And he's, I think, you know, playing with this thing that it's not unique to this film, but it is certainly appropriate in an homage to France to sort of play with this idea that like maybe you can do more with a movie. Now, that's something, it's taste dependent, right? Whether that works for you is up to you. But you know, it seems like he's kind of like, you know, creating this very unique format. And you could almost imagine this movie having been broken up into several short films. If you like Wes Anderson a lot, you can find on Netflix 5 short films he did last 2 years ago
Ronald Dahl ones, yeah.
based on Roald Dahl short stories. And
Those
you know,
are kind of creepy, actually.
they're different, and it reminds you that Roald Dahl could sometimes have a dark, sinister side.
They're pretty dark, yeah.
But they're meant to be watched individually. So here he's kind of invented this format for this movie that approximates a magazine, right? You get the pages and you get, you know, kind of a sense of how long the segment's going to be before you see it, but you're intended to kind of experience it as someone might reading the New Yorker cover to cover without every single section, but you know, you've got these distinct kind of components all part of it. And then kind of like the big cover montage at the end, I guess, as you pointed out. But if also if you're kind of following him, you'll find then in his next movie, Asteroid City, you know, which is kind of set in the Southwest of America, he's again really, you know, kind of playing with these kind of Brechtian levels there, where instead of it kind of being chaptered, I'm frozen on my own screen. I hope people can still hear me. The instead of things being chaptered, it's almost like you're going levels deeper and coming out, and like, you know, it's presented as like a TV kind of a filmed play, and then we're kind of meeting the screenwriters, and we're inside the movie, and then we're meeting the actors who played the characters, and is there any level on which you can take this as real? Here, one of the things I like about that is we are hearing the words of the writers, but we're also getting jokes at their expense. And by that, I mean, like, we know that Wes Anderson kind of appreciates or worships them, right? But at the same time, it's like what's her name? The Berenson, the Tilda Swinton character. That's Rosamund Bernier, essentially. You can see the kind of giving art lectures with the big hair and the elegant dresses, like that is a very specific, New Yorker writer that she's playing off of. And yet there's this kind of running joke of her being like very erotically forward and maybe having slept with
It's
all
always
of the
dropping
people.
those little bits.
Yeah. And so I think that brings in this kind of idea of are the writers trustworthy? Is this account of May 1968 entirely accurate if you were sleeping with the head of the movement? This kind of thing. But go ahead, Patricia.
I've probably lost my mind when I say this, and I'm sure there's going to be totally dead silence. But when I first started to see the first section with, the woman guard who was also his muse, and he's mentally ill and he's violent and all this going on,
Right.
it reminded me of Almodovar.
Interesting.
I felt like I was seeing that, because it's the same thing. It's dark. A lot of the things that Almodovar does is very dark, and the relationship between the characters is usually pretty strange on the most part. And also, just the coloring, the black and the white and the gray and the light, the use of light. That's the feeling that I got, that he was doing something that was quite similar to what Almodovar does in his movies. That's all.
I mean, that's an interesting comparison. I do think that there's something fascinating about Wes Anderson in that, to me, there's something totally original about his voice, by which I mean, he's kind of created this aesthetic that of the kind of framing things directly head on, things being very artificial so that we aren't surprised if suddenly if you were watching me and someone pulled the wall away, you'd be like, well, that's a Wes Anderson movie. You're allowed to do that or whatever, but so all of that is kind of like his own,
Oh yeah, I just saw that in the beginning, just that the artist one,
but to your point, I think he's also synthesizing everything around him, and these movies are really, kind of in the same way that Tarantino movies are in a different way. Tarantino's obsessed with, like, B movies from classic Hollywood, 70s exploitation
Roger
films.
Corman films, yeah.
Roger Corman drive-in stuff. And he's also Jean-Pierre Melville, my kind of idol of French cinema, was this way too. He watched all these American movies, was a big sponge of all that stuff. And they all turn around and create something original that I think across the board improves upon the kind of raw elements they were working with. And so that comparison to Almodovar is an interesting one, where I don't know if he would even recognize that, but if it kind of, reminds you or resonates in certain ways, I think what's specific about that sequence that I never had seen previously in Wes Anderson's movie is eroticism. I mean, it's almost like this little boy had been playing with his train set for 30 years at the movies, and here you have something very carnal in that connection between Benicio del Toro and Léa Seydoux. And I was like, oh, did Wes Anderson, like, did his voice just drop? Did he just hit puberty? Like, he's like grown up a little bit. And I mean that kind of affectionately, but he's, I would like to spend more time with Wes Anderson in the grown-up world. even if a lot of his things feel like doll houses or you know, reminders of kind of, he almost, his attention to detail reminds me of the way that when you're a child, you're hypersensitive to the colors of things, to the, you know, the font on something. There's a kind of Proustian thing too, of like the way that he pays attention to that stuff is like, it's triggering memories, right? Like if you've been to France and you're in Le Semblag and you see that little tray by the door with all the red, you know, cream carafe, you might think like, those are the ones that I saw in the French cafe when I was 14 or whatever. You know, it's like his mind kind of works that way. But like Almodovar, I think, has always been in that zone. He's always been punk and queer and kind of like sex forward or sex positive or whatever the phrase is. And so it's
I
like
have a lot of very strong women characters too, like the
totally,
mother
yeah,
is her own person, you know, so
right.
I can see that connection.
Yeah, that's a good point, that Léa Seydoux is not an object. She's being presented as one at first, but that moment she like slaps his hand, and from then on, you realize she's basically orchestrated this whole situation. And when you get her flashback, it kind of, you know, deepens her background. So I, uh, I love that comparison or the link your mind made there, to Almodovar, because to me it represents maybe Wes Anderson growing up a little bit.
Because he's only 50. It was like,
Right.
how old he is.
But he does wear those, he does wear clothes like 3 sizes too small, where his like, you know, sleeves are short, like, you know, like a kid who's kind of outgrown his trousers. You know,
I read something where he wears a suit and tie to direct on the set all the time. He is a Wes Anderson character when he directs.
it's true, right?
He's totally into the moment, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love that.
It's interesting. I think we should probably wrap up here in a moment, but you know, I went once to Milan, and in Milan, there's the Prada Foundation, or whatever the Italian version of those words are, and the Fondazione Prada or something like that. And in the Prada Foundation's kind of lobby, there is a cafe that they invited Wes Anderson to art direct. And so you can go and have an Aperol Spritz or an espresso or whatever you want in a cafe designed by Wes Anderson. And there's just something, I think, very satisfying about getting to step into a physical space that maybe this is the experience I will get to have at the Cinémathèque Française. They must have recreated some things, you know, where because in his movies, you're doing that, but you're doing it for the number of seconds he gives you. And sometimes it's just that. Like, I love the early sequence when you have Owen Wilson biking around the city and they show side by side the photos. And they're not photos, they're like, you know, kind of people pose still, but they're kind of wiggling a little.
Fauxto, photos.
There you go. Well done, Suzette. Photos. The and the ones on the left, the black and white ones, look like convincing recreations of kind of things of the era, and then the ones on the right are kind of clearly comedic ones. But you only get each of those for so long, and so you can, you know, through owning it on DVD or whatever, you can go back and spend some time with that. I'm going to run back and forth. Give me 1 second. This is a book. This is a book that I like found a few years ago that I just loved. That's like Luc Sante, who writes for the New Yorker, and it's like the you know, for someone who buys books like this or subscribes to the New Yorker, like this is the movie for us, right? You know, I don't know if that describes the rest of you here, but like, you know, this is a collection of his essays, and like, look at this. Like, these are photos that could be, you know, designs for things we saw in this movie, right? You know, and it's clear that Wes Anderson spent a lot of time just kind of absorbing all of these kind of reportage. You even have David Remnick, who is, you know, or is editor of the New Yorker, who went and lived with his family in New York for a few years. Does anyone remember the name of the book? David Remnick wrote a book with Moon in the title.
Oh, no, that was Adam Gopnik.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting it confused. Okay.
Yeah, Paris to the Moon.
Exactly.
I've read it like 3 times. I met him. He is the most amazing human. If you want to have a dinner party and bring interesting people in, he will write about any subject exquisitely. He was the most amazing speaker I'd ever experienced in a lecture situation. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and there you have basically a New Yorker super brain going to, Paris
5 years he lived there,
in a
with
more modern
family, and
time. Yeah.
I have that on the shelf too.
Suzette, thank you for piping up. I'm glad
Oh,
we
sorry,
could kind
I'm
of play
too
off each other a
chatty.
little bit
I'm
there.
sorry if I overwhelmed everyone.
No, not at all. I want to remind people we'll be back. I'll be back in 2 months, but I totally get to the point of several of you that there's a lot to digest in this movie, and it's a little hard to find your way into a conversation about it. Hopefully this was fun for all of you and maybe gives you some I do think sometimes like a movie like this, it's kind of like, well, that was something. What do I do with it? And it's like, some places to start unpacking it a little bit. But all right, so Joe Myers will be our host next month. Thank you, Joe, for stepping in for that. And I will be back in June to see you all again after Cannes. So
I can't wait
please
to hear
come
your
next
report.
month, and I look forward to seeing you again on my return.
Do you know what the next film is?
Yes, it's in the chat. It's called Full Time. It's a great movie. It's one of these movies that is an art film that has that locomotive kind of, almost like suspense thriller energy. So
Is it contemporary, set in contemporary time?
it is. It's a kind of like a contemporary woman trying to sort of like pull her life together in kind of a almost real-time situation. So I don't want to say too much. I've said a lot today, but I'm going to let Joe kind of take it next month, and I'll see you soon.
Merci
Bravo.
beaucoup. Yeah.
Merci.
Merci. Bonne fenceman.
So thank you so much to Peter, and thanks as always to Renee Ketchum, Isabelle Leroux, and Melissa Sora with Alliance Française. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, stuck with us through our technical difficulties. I actually will also be in Cannes next month, won't be seeing you, but you'll be in good hands with Joe Myers on the 19th for the discussion of Full Time. I put a link to that in the chat, and Peter and I will both see you back here in June.
Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Au
Good
revoir.
night.